The clock in the hallway had been louder that day, ticking like it was keeping score of my loneliness. I'd baked a chocolate cake hours earlier, a little lopsided thing, soft in the center, icing smelling faintly burnt where my hand had trembled near the oven door. 2 plates sat on the table, the same ones Derek used when he was a boy. I'd polished them out of habit, though I suppose it didn't matter. The candles I'd placed around the room burned stubbornly low, their wax running like tired tears down the sides of the holders. I kept glancing at my phone, screen lighting up only for banks, subscriptions, the pastor's daily verse never for him. There was a small hope that maybe, just maybe, he was planning something big, some surprise that would turn my waiting into laughter later. That kind of hope is a tricky thing. It sits gentle at first, then grows heavier with each quiet minute. Outside the window, the neighborhood had gone still. Children's bikes leaned against fences, porch lights flickered on one by one. I sat at that table, fork resting beside an untouched slice, pretending patience, pretending peace. The silence throbbed in my ears, full of the things he wasn't saying. My son, the one who used to sing happy birthday off-key until I laughed myself breathless, was somewhere out there under city lights, too successful, too busy to lift a phone. I told myself he must have been busy, but that silence, it felt like being erased. If only I'd known that silence wasn't the worst sound I'd hear that week. My name is Lorraine Miller, 62 years old, born and raised where the roads curl like question marks through the red clay of southern Georgia. Folks around here say you can smell rain before you see it, and they're right, earthy, like wet pennies and pine sap. I grew up learning how to stretch a dollar and hold my tongue, both lessons that stuck to me tighter than church gloves on a July morning. I worked most of my life as a nurse at the county clinic. The paychecks were small, but the need was big, and somehow the balance made sense. I learned to catch a baby, ease a fever, and pray for folks who couldn't pay their bills. My own paycheck carried us, me and my boy, Derek, through thick years and thin ones. His father was gone early, too mean for staying and too proud for apologizing, so it was just the two of us learning how to turn silence into shelter. Our little rented house sat at the edge of town, paint peeling like old scabs on the siding. On Sundays I baked biscuits that rose high as my hopes for that child, butter melting faster than we could bless them. Derek used to sit at the kitchen table with his elbows tucked in proper, pretending he was some big city businessman, spreading jelly on his biscuits as if it were a signing bonus. I can still see his small hands stacking Lego towers and saying, "One day, Mama, I'm gonna buy you a house big enough for the moon." Back then, he was all laughter and light, a boy who'd rather chase clouds than chores. I'd come home from 12-hour shifts smelling of antiseptic and sweat, feet blistered and back screaming, but he'd climb into my lap anyway with a battered storybook. I'd read till the words blurred and my head lolled forward, pages sticking to my cheek where I'd dozed off. Derek would tug my chin up and whisper, "You need rest, Mama," the same way a doctor might. I used to joke that he was born half-grown, born knowing how to take care of me. Those were the years when we built our love out of scraps, coupon dinners, second-hand clothes, and borrowed dreams. I'd sit by his bed before sunrise, smoothing his blanket and whispering a prayer that the world would treat him gentler than it treated me. Each morning before catching the bus to the clinic, I watched him sleeping in that patch of golden light that slipped through the cracked blinds, and I swore that boy glowed with a promise. Then came the scholarship letters, the business degree, and the way he carried himself taller each time he came home for holidays. I should have been nothing but proud, and I was, but pride's a tricky thing for a mother. It's sweet at first, then burns if you hold it too long. He started talking about investors, mergers, exit strategies, words that didn't quite fit in the quiet kitchen where we'd once shared cornbread and gossip. Phone calls became texts, and even those started coming from his assistant. "Mr. Miller is in meetings today." Mr. Miller, like I was suddenly calling up some stranger who only happened to share my son's voice. When he did find time to visit, he arrived in a black car that hummed so soft you could mistake it for silence. He'd step out wearing that city smell expensive cologne covering the absence of home. Still, I told myself success doesn't ruin love, it just dresses it in a different suit. I tucked my feelings back into the drawer with old birthday cards, letters written in boyish handwriting promising forever. Maybe that's what mothers do, we keep old versions of our children folded neat, just in case they forget how they started. Sometimes I pictured him looking out from a glass tower somewhere, maybe remembering our old house with its squeaky porch swing and chipped coffee mugs. And even if he never called as much as I prayed he would, I believed that bond between us stretched wide enough to survive anything, a rubber band of love pulled across time zones. Back then, I thought love could survive any distance as long as we remembered to call home. Mornings in my little house follow their own quiet gospel. The first sermon comes from the kettle, whistling its thin praise while the radio hums low in the kitchen, half hymns, half static. I move slow these days, knees clicking like stubborn metronomes, pacing the rhythm that holds my world together. I feed the sparrows that wait on the porch rail, 5 of them if I count right, maybe 6 on generous days. They hop close now, bold little souls who trust I'll never forget them. After breakfast comes my walk down Maple Street, the sun barely pushing through the pecan trees. I nod at neighbors watering their yards, rubber hoses coiling like sleeping green snakes. Folks still call out, "Morning, Miss Lorraine," and I still wave back, though most of them are half my age. The air smells of dew and gasoline, faint and familiar. Every step is its own small prayer of gratitude, my heart still beating, my hand still steady enough to tie a shoelace. 3 times a week, I volunteer at the church pantry, sorting canned vegetables and handing out bread that's 1 day shy of expiration. We share stories more than sermons there. Miss Cleo talks about her grandbabies, Brother James brags about his tomato plants, and I mostly listen. Sometimes I mention Derek, not his millions or the glossy magazine features, just his name said soft. "My boy's doing fine," I tell them, because that's what a mother is supposed to say, fine. The truth shows up instead through glimpses, those moments when I'm standing in line at the grocery store and spot his face on the cover of a business magazine. Derek Miller, the visionary behind the next tech revolution. I study the photo until my eyes sting. He looks so composed, jaw sharp, smile rehearsed. The same dimple on his left cheek still there, but his eyes, they've changed. There's a distance in them that no mother can mistake, an invisible glass between his world and mine. At home, I clip those articles and slide them into a binder. It's childish, I know, but each piece feels like a postcard from the life he never writes about, the big city offices, the chauffeured cars, the awards lined on shelves I'll never dust. Sometimes the television shows him shaking hands with politicians, cameras flashing. I sit close to the screen, touching my fingers to his face like prayer. Pride mixes with something sour, a taste like metal on my tongue. The rest of my days fill themselves with ordinary grace. I quilt in the afternoons, the needle pricking rhythm into fabric older than Derek's first report card. I nap in the soft hum of ceiling fans. Supper is simple: corn, greens, cornbread crisped just right in a black skillet. Life may have shrunk down to small things, but those small things sing when you learn how to listen. Still, every year, there is one ritual that reaches beyond the smallness, a ritual stitched somewhere between hope and habit. A week before my birthday, I pull out the old recipe card for Mama's chocolate cake, faded ink and oil stains marking decades of sweetness and sorrow. I buy fresh eggs even when the fridge already holds enough, because heaven forbid a birthday cake fall flat from staleness. The same candle waits in the drawer, its wick short from too many revisited birthdays. It's not fancy, just steadfast. In early autumn of that year, I called Derek's office, the phone picked up by a young woman with a voice that smiled without meaning it. "Mr. Miller's in meetings all week," she told me. There was polite firmness in her tone, the kind reserved for strangers. I nearly laughed the idea of needing to book an appointment with my own child. I left a message anyway, just reminding him Mama's birthday's next Thursday. "Tell him he better not forget this time." I meant it as a joke, though the words tasted brittle. The next day, his assistant Lydia, I think, sent an email. "Mr. Miller sends his love. His schedule is tight, but he'll reach out soon." I stared at the phrase "his schedule is tight." Something about it put a chill in my stomach. I told myself not to take it personally. The boy was busy building empires, and I was busy pretending that didn't hurt. As the days slid closer to my birthday, I doubled down on my small diversions. Scrubbed the kitchen cabinets, polished the silver Derek hadn't touched since he gifted it years ago, checked the mailbox as if affection might arrive in an envelope. My routine held firm like a hymnal where every verse ended the same. I didn't think much of it then, but routines have a way of hiding what's broken underneath. The week before my birthday, the air itself seemed to hesitate outside my windows. Summer had straightened its spine, the cicadas louder each night, their cry steady and relentless just like my thoughts. I'd texted Derek 2 days in a row, small messages that sounded lighter than they felt. Don't forget our cake tradition this week, and later, weather's been fine down here. Hope business isn't wearing you out. He responded with the same careful politeness you'd reserve for a client, not a mother. Great to hear, Mom. I'll try to call this weekend. Busy quarter for us. The words might as well have been mailed from another planet. Once, Derek's messages brimmed with misspellings and emojis that made no sense back then. He was all heart and enthusiasm. Now every letter sounded proofread, every sentence lined with distance. I tried to convince myself it was just stress, that the corporate world shaped people's tone like wind carves stone. But inside me, something small and stubborn began to ache. That Sunday, Pastor Green had preached about the illusion of togetherness in an age of screens, and I swore that man was peeking straight into my pocket. After service, Miss Cleo asked if Derek was visiting for my birthday. I smiled as if the answer had been yes. It's amazing the lies we learn to tell on behalf of someone else's absence. Monday arrived with its regular din, kettle rattling, phone buzzing, sparrows tapping impatiently at the porch rail. I checked my email out of habit, flyers, receipts, church bulletins until one unfamiliar message caught my eye. The subject line read, "Gala confirming attendance for Mr. Miller." It was meant for an assistant named Aaron, but somehow my address had slipped into the chain. I stared at the glowing screen, that single word gala echoing in the corners of my kitchen. I clicked it open. There it was, a glittering description of a high-profile charity event in Atlanta, hosted by none other than my son's company, scheduled for Thursday night, my birthday, with a guest list stacked with celebrities and investors. Attached was an image draft, gold banners, champagne glass motifs, and right at the center, Derek's smiling face. For a long minute, I simply stared, the refrigerator humming behind me like background judgment. Then came the excuses. Maybe it's a daytime event, maybe he'll fly down afterward, he always does. I repeated those words like a lullaby, steady and desperate. The mind of a mother is a fine machine for denial. It manufactures comfort even when there's no raw material left. I tried calling him that afternoon, twice. The first went to voicemail, his crisp recorded tone saying my name wrong, formal, Lorraine Miller. The second time, his assistant answered, a brisk voice smoothed over with apology. Mr. Miller's in preparation meetings for the gala. May I take a message? I could hear chatter in the background, laughter that didn't belong to my world. Tell him his mama was just checking in, I said. My voice cracked on mama, and the woman's pause told me she'd heard it too. Yes, she replied softly before hanging up. That night, I sat outside on the porch swing, stars scattered thin across a cloudy sky. My phone lay face up beside me, unlit. I imagined my boy walking through a ballroom under chandeliers, wearing the same half-smile I'd seen in magazines. Folks would pat his back, clink their glasses, toast to his brilliance. I hoped, absurdly, that one of those guests might ask, "Where's your mother tonight?" Maybe then he'd remember. To distract myself, I rifled through old photo albums stacked high in my living room cabinet. The plastic pages carried fingerprints and time's dusty breath. There was Derek at 6 years old, cheeks covered in frosting, paper crown tilted sideways. I'd drawn smiley faces on the corners of that photo, watching him grin proudly over a cake shaped like a toy train. Every year, we'd turned birthdays into small miracles, me pretending I could afford big magic, him pretending he didn't notice how hard it was for me to make it happen. One particular memory came rushing back, the year he turned 12, when the bakery lost our order. I'd baked a plain yellow cake from scratch instead, frosting uneven, sprinkles clumped. Derek had looked at it and said, "That's okay, Mama. We'll call this one the improved cake." All good things start as mistakes. I'd laughed until tears smudged the eyeliner I'd worn just for him. That moment felt like forever then. Now, decades later, his own birthday parties probably sparkled under studio lighting, not flickering candles. I picked up that childhood photo, pressed it against my chest, and whispered, "You kept your promise about the big house, baby." I just never knew it'd be one I couldn't fit inside. The next morning, a new email appeared from Lydia. Just 3 lines, polite as pearls. "Hi Mrs. Miller, just confirming that Mr. Miller will not be available later this week. He sends warm regards and promises to catch up soon." I reread the sentence again and again until the letters blurred. Warm regards, like I was a business partner to be pacified, not the woman who once carried him through sleepless nights in the glow of a hallway nightlight. The rest of that day passed in a fog. I went to the market, forgot half my list, paid with trembling hands. Even the cashiers "have a blessed day" sounded sharp at the edges. Back home, I tried to bake, as if stirring flour and sugar might knead my heart back into shape. But everything tasted off, even the air. By Wednesday night, my denial had worn thin as gauze. I checked social media against my better judgment. There it was again: announcements of the gala, hosts tagged, snippets of menu tastings, the kind of extravagance that makes people forget the meaning of days ordinary folks cling to. Among the hashtags, a caption read, "Join Derek Miller and industry leaders for a night of elegance and innovation." Thursday morning arrived bright and cruel. The paper on my porch fluttered in the breeze, headline about market trends somehow tied to Derek's company. I didn't open it. I made coffee instead, the smell bitter and anchoring. While the cup cooled in my hands, I glanced at the old birthday candle on my counter, its wick bent like a question mark. For a split second, I thought about calling him one more time. But what would I say? "Son, did your mother make the guest list this year?" No. I set the phone down and turned on the radio, letting gospel voices fill the kitchen. Faith doesn't erase hurt, but it gives it manners, teaches it how to sit quietly beside you. The clock ticked its usual rhythm, but every second felt slightly offbeat, like a skipped note in a familiar song. Somewhere far above the quiet houses of my street, my son was likely walking into a ballroom, laughter swelling around him, forgetting the date carved into his own mother's heart since the day she first held him. The truth wasn't hiding, it was sitting plain in my inbox, waiting for me to stop pretending. The morning after my birthday crept in without ceremony. No sunbeam on my cheek, no song of celebration, just the faint rattle of branches against my window. The house smelled faintly of wax from the candles I'd let burn down to puddles the night before, their smoke curled up like sighs that never left the room. My phone sat motionless on the counter, mocking me with its silence. I brewed a pot of coffee so strong it threatened to peel the lining off my throat, just to feel something wake inside me. I told myself I wouldn't look. There was nothing to gain by peeking into the life Derek had chosen, the one conducted under chandeliers and spotlights while I pulled weeds by hand. But curiosity, that old unfaithful friend, wouldn't rest. I turned on my laptop, and before the screen even fully lit, there it was: Derek Miller Gala for Innovation and Impact, hosted by Miller Technologies. A headline glowing brighter than the blue light that illuminated my face. The photos loaded slow, each one another nail driven steady through my chest. Guests in black tie elegance, champagne poised, sequins flashing under crystal light. My son stood at the center of it all, laughing with someone famous enough to have their own Wikipedia page. The words under the footage read, "A night of opulence and vision, Miller Technologies ushers in a new era of success." And right there, the moment that broke me twice over: a towering cake wheeled onto the stage, frosting slick as marble, candles flickering gold. The caption beneath it read simply, "Celebrating another stellar year with our fearless leader." That cake. My birthday night. For a few long seconds, everything inside the room stopped breathing with me. The refrigerator hum sank to a distant buzz, and my heart kept time with the soft pulse of the modem blink. I whispered it out loud, because the silence needed proof. My boy wasn't too busy, he was just elsewhere. The words cracked somewhere between disbelief and understanding. I pressed a hand over my mouth like I might shove them back in, but it was too late. They'd slipped out, small and final as a funeral bell. I thought back to every excuse I'd ever made for him: jet lag, time zones, meetings that ran late, assistants who forgot to pass along messages. I'd built a tower of forgiveness so tall it reached the clouds he now lived beneath. Turns out it only took one photograph to turn the whole thing to dust. I clicked through the images again, punishing myself with clarity. Derek posed with his arm tucked around a woman in a silver gown I didn't recognize. He cut a ribbon as golden confetti showered down. He stood atop that stage beneath lights so bright he had to squint, holding up a flute of champagne while the crowd roared. I looked around my kitchen, at the half-eaten slice of my own cake still sitting there. Frosting crusted at the edges, candle stub bent nearly in half like it was bowing to defeat. I remembered how I'd practiced patience for hours, trying not to watch the clock too closely, convincing myself his voice would come through before the night was over. And now, knowing exactly how he'd spent those hours, I felt ridiculous enough to laugh, and the laugh came out wrong, sharp and wet. The photos blurred as tears rose, but I kept scrolling anyway. I needed to see every angle of my own erasure. One image caught me hardest: him standing behind a white podium emblazoned with his signature logo, smiling wide. Behind him, a screen projected the words family, legacy, innovation, family. I pushed the laptop closed so fast the sound echoed like a slap. The tears that followed weren't graceful movie tears, they were ugly, hiccuping things that tasted like salt and exhaustion. I pressed my forehead to the cool edge of the counter and sobbed until the sound startled even me. It wasn't just sadness, it was the humiliation of realizing I'd been a footnote in my own child's story. When I could finally breathe steady enough, I stood, wiped my face, and reached for the phone. My thumb hovered over his number so long I nearly talked myself out of it. But there's something about betrayal, it demands confrontation, like a storm begging to be heard. He answered on the second ring, voice tight with background noise. I could hear laughter behind him, glasses clinking. "Mama," he said, upbeat, distracted, the same tone people use when answering a call they wish had gone to voicemail. "Derek," I managed, trying to swallow the tremor in my throat. Are you at the gala right now?" There was a pause, then a brittle chuckle. "You saw that?" "Yeah, we're just wrapping up, big success tonight. I was gonna call you tomorrow." "Tomorrow," I repeated, quiet but pointed. "You were gonna call your mother tomorrow, after the party?" Another pause. I could almost see his eyes darting toward whoever might be looking his way, that half-smile rearranging itself for the cameras. "Mama, can we talk later? I'm in the middle of something." The words landed heavy, metallic. They didn't shout, they didn't accuse, they just confirmed everything those pictures had already screamed. I could hear his name being called in the background, someone laughing too close. "Of course," I said, voice steady suddenly, startlingly. "Wouldn't want to interrupt the middle of something." "Don't be like that," he started, but I'd already clicked the line dead. The dial tone hummed soft and lonely on the other end before I set the phone down. I stared at that little machine like it had betrayed me too. In the hush that followed, I could hear the faint echo of his childhood voice in my head, "Don't hang up on me, Mama." Only this time, I'd been the one left holding silence. I walked to the window, looked out at the dark yard. Streetlights pooled gold on the cracked asphalt. Somewhere a dog barked twice, indifferent. I wrapped my arms around myself and tried to catch my breath. It felt like the house itself sagged, exhaling with me. Inside my mind, his laughter at that party overlapped with the memory of a smaller sound: his boyish giggle the night we burned marshmallows on the stovetop. We'd stood together in our cramped kitchen, sticky-fingered, fire alarm chirping overhead, both of us laughing so hard we couldn't stop. Back then, he'd looked up at me and said, "Nobody else could make me laugh like you do, Mama." I wondered if he remembered that at all, while he smiled for cameras under crystal chandeliers. I sat at the kitchen table and let everything settle. There's a special kind of quiet after disappointment, thick and echoing. You could mistake it for peace if you weren't paying attention. Mine felt like insulation, a soundproof wall built brick by brick out of pride, business, and miles of unspoken things. I pulled the half-burnt candle close, Watched the leftover wax harden in small white pools. Funny how something can burn bright and pure, then freeze in silence right after. It reminded me of us. That night, sleep refused to visit. I wandered from room to room, tracing old photos on the walls. Derek on his first day of college, Derek at his high school graduation, his arms slung around me while I tried not to ruin the picture by crying. All those moments captured before success taught him how to edit himself. By dawn, I brewed another pot of coffee, this time leaving half of it untouched. The news online buzzed with gala reviews articles praising his leadership, his humble roots in a small Georgia town. That phrase caught in my throat like a lie told too neatly. Humble roots, I muttered. Roots still waiting for a phone call. Hours passed that felt like days. I didn't hear from him, not even a follow-up apology. Maybe he thought I'd eventually settle back into silence, that I'd keep being the forgiving mother who would smooth things over with a single "it's fine, baby." But this time was different. This time, something inside me shifted. You see, when someone forgets you long enough, you start to forget the sound of your own worth. And when that memory crawls back, it comes armed with both grief and fire. That evening, I switched off every light in the house and sat in the living room glow of the last pink daylight. My phone stayed silent. I imagined Derek somewhere exchanging post-gala congratulations, his smile automatic, his eyes scanning for more important faces. For years, I'd told myself that money didn't change hearts, just addresses. But standing there in that hollow light, I finally believed another truth: money buys soundproof walls. It doesn't muffle the noise of the world, it mutes the calls from home. I folded my hands and whispered a prayer anyway, not asking God to punish him, just to soften me. Anger was a heavy coat, and I didn't have the strength to wear it long. I prayed for the small boy still living somewhere inside that grown man's armor, the one who once promised to buy his mama a house big enough for the moon. The sky outside dimmed to indigo. Across the street, a neighbor's window glowed warm, voices drifting through. That human closeness felt foreign, distant. Then, in the hush, I heard it again, the clock from the hallway, steady, deliberate, reminding me that life doesn't pause for heartbreak. It only marks it, second by second. But heartbreak has its own stubborn rhythm, and mine wasn't done breaking yet. 2 nights after the gala, I woke up before dawn with a thought that wouldn't let me rest. If he wouldn't bring himself home to me, then I would take a piece of home to him. It wasn't anger driving me anymore, it was something quieter, duller, the need for him to remember. Memory is a tricky salvation. It can save you or skin you raw. I laid out the things I would carry, each one as familiar as my reflection in the bathroom mirror. There was the scrapbook I'd been adding to since he was a boy, photographs, dried birthday petals, his first Mother's Day card drawn on construction paper, and tucked inside a small envelope, that soft blonde curl from his first haircut tied with blue thread. In a tiny plastic sleeve was the paper band from the hospital, my name beside his in smeared ink. I ran my thumb across it until the letters felt like they might breathe again. By the time the sun began to touch the pine trees, I'd packed the scrapbook into a cloth bag and pulled on my grey cardigan. The bus schedule online told me the 7:15 would reach Atlanta by noon. I made toast but couldn't eat it, left the crusts for the sparrows instead. The air carried the smell of rain and diesel that morning, and when the bus door opened with its metallic hiss, I felt like I was stepping into another version of my life. Seat 23, window side. The ride took 4 hours and a lifetime. I watched the landscape shift from sleepy fields to the sharp edges of highways. Town names rolled past like old friends I'd outgrown. Around me, passengers stared at their phones, faces lit blue, fingers scrolling confessions they'd never speak aloud. A child behind me was playing a game that made beeping noises. I thought about Derek at that age, making paper airplanes out of old prescriptions from the clinic. We didn't have much, but we had laughter, and sometimes that was worth more than the bills I couldn't pay. Halfway through the trip, a man boarded in Macon and sat beside me. He smelled faintly of aftershave and peppermint. Headed to the city, he asked kindly. Yes, I said, clutching the bag tighter. Going to see my son. He nodded as though that explained everything. I suppose it did. When the bus finally wheezed to a halt at the downtown terminal, I stepped onto the pavement and looked up. The skyline stabbed at the clouds, buildings lined with mirrors that reflected back the sky without ever touching it. Derek's tower glittered brightest, the company logo catching the light like a crown. I'd seen it before on television, but in person it felt less like a place humans belonged and more like something a god might build out of pride. Inside the lobby, it smelled of polished marble and chilled air, like money tried too hard to stay clean. A man in a navy suit stood behind the reception desk. His name tag said Anthony, his smile crisp but cautious. "I'm here to see Derek Miller," I said, voice soft but certain. "He's my son." Anthony's eyebrows lifted before manners caught them. "Do you have an appointment, "Just a mother's right to see her child," I replied. "That ought to count for something." He hesitated. "Mr. Miller's calendar is very full. Maybe if I check with his assistant." The way he said assistant made my stomach twitch. Lydia again, most likely, that pleasant voice that had fenced me out with politeness. Anthony leaned toward his computer, fingers clicking too fast. "It looks like he's in back-to-back meetings until evening." I shifted the bag to my other shoulder. "Then I'll wait. I'm afraid the building doesn't allow visitors without clearance." His words were apologetic, not unkind. Rules, after all, were easier to lean on than compassion. I stood there, the hum of elevators rising behind me. I must have looked small in that grand place, grey hair neatly pinned, shoes scuffed from sidewalks, cardigan sleeves rolled to elbows. For a moment I considered leaving, saving myself further embarrassment. Then, from the far end of the counter, a young woman with caramel-colored braids approached. She couldn't have been more than 25, wearing a receptionist badge and sympathy in her eyes. "Anthony," she murmured, "I'll take care of it." Then to me, "If you come early tomorrow morning, before the press meetings begin, you might catch him. Sometimes he stops by the office around 7:30 for coffee before the building opens to staff." I blinked at her kindness. "That's mighty helpful of you." She gave a small, careful smile. "Just don't tell anyone I told you that." I promised I wouldn't, though gratitude had already made me teary. I checked into a modest hotel near the station. That night I hardly slept. The city outside my window throbbed with noise, horns, sirens, laughter that rose and fell like wind in tin. I pressed my hand against the glass, felt its vibration, wondered if somewhere among those sounds my son's laughter echoed. When dawn spread grey light across the horizon, I dressed in my best church outfit, a navy dress with tiny pearl buttons. I walked to the skyscraper, clutching the cloth bag like it contained my heart itself. The street smelled of roasted coffee and fumes. Beautiful people in suits marched past without glancing up. The security guard at the lobby eyed me but said nothing. The kind receptionist from the day before caught my gaze and gave a barely visible nod toward the elevator bank. My breath wavered. I stepped into the elevator, watching numbers climb higher than my knees had ever taken me. His office door bore his name in brushed steel, Derek Miller, CEO. For a moment, I almost turned back. What right did I have to interrupt his shining world with all this ordinary love? But the thought of walking away felt heavier than any humiliation waiting inside. I knocked once, twice. "Come in," called that familiar voice, distant through the door. He looked up from his desk when I stepped in, confusion flickering to shock. He hadn't expected me, not in 100 years could he have planned for this. He stood so quickly his chair rolled backward against the wall. "Mama, what are you doing here?" I smiled the way only exhaustion can, small and trembling. "I came to bring you something." He ran a hand through his neat hair, pulling composure around him like armor. "You should have called first. I mean, there's security, schedules." I reckon none of that stopped me, now did it? I placed the bag on his spotless desk. "You left a gap last week, son. Thought maybe a mother's presence might fill it." He sighed, eyes darting to the glass wall behind me. The skyline beyond glittered indifferent. "Listen, I know I missed your birthday. Things were hectic, investors flew in last minute, deadline pressure, PR coordination." He waved his hands in practiced rhythm, listing reasons like they were absolutions. Business pressure, I finished softly. That's what you mean. He nodded, half relieved I'd said it for him. Exactly. You know how it is. I took a long, steady look at him. The crisp suit, the perfect tie, those eyes too tired for their age. No, baby, I said quietly. I don't know how it is. I only know how it feels. He opened his mouth to argue, but I slid the scrapbook toward him, my hand lingering on the worn cover. This, I whispered, is what it looked like getting you here. Every cut finger, every missed meal, every prayer said over a child I loved more than breath itself. He stared at it, uncertain. I eased open the first page, a picture of newborn him, red and beautiful, wrapped in hospital cloth. Beneath it, the tiny wristband tacked with a safety pin. His eyes softened, just a flicker, but he didn't reach for it. I kept it all, I said. The first tooth, the drawing of us holding hands, the letter you wrote from college promising to come home every month. You've built an empire, Derek, and I'm proud of that. But don't you ever mistake it for having built a life. He rubbed at his temple, voice straining. Mama, I never meant to hurt you. I've just been busy, I finished again, not unkind. Always busy. For a heartbeat, silence took the room. The city's endless hum pressed against the windows, muffled. I pushed the scrapbook to the center of his desk. That's the only investment that never lost value. His eyes glistened, though he turned away before I could be sure. Mama, please, don't. But I was already walking toward the door. I didn't come to make you sorry, I said, hand on the handle. I just came to remind you who calls you son. I left before he could finish whatever sentence followed. The hallway swallowed me, the elevator cold as a confession box. When the doors slid open to the lobby, I felt lighter and ruined all at once. Outside, the city had fully bloomed, awake people rushing, horns snapping the air. I found a bench near the bus stop and sat down, clutching the small emptiness where the scrapbook had been. Maybe he'd never open it. Maybe he'd shove it in a drawer until guilt cracked it open years later. Still, a piece of me wanted to believe he'd flip through those pages that very day, see what love looks like when it survives everything but pride. The bus home came an hour later. I took my seat beside the window again. Streets slipped by, grey and gleaming from last night's rain. A billboard flashed an ad for his company, all silver and blue, his face still smiling with that confident ease. I looked away. Halfway down the highway, I closed my eyes and tried to rest. But the image of him standing behind that glass desk refused to fade. The suit, the startled guilt, the scrapbook sitting unopened between us like a living heart. I thought I'd left the pain in that office, but news travels faster than guilt. The story found its way to the internet before I even unpacked my bag. I hadn't planned to tell a soul about that visit. Some things just belong in the quiet safety of your own shame. But by the time the bus had rumbled back into my little town and I dragged my feet up the gravel drive, the world had already met me without an invitation. My neighbor's teenage grandson was the first to mention it. He came running from across the road, phone in hand, excitement flickering behind his braces. Miss Lorraine, you're trending, he yelled, and I laughed at first, thinking he was joking. But then he spun the screen toward me. There it was, my face caught mid-stride in Derek's marble lobby, my hand clutching the cloth bag close to my chest. The caption beneath it read, "Some people forget who raised them." I stared at that frozen image. My grey hair frizzed from the city humidity, cardigan drooping from the long ride, expression somewhere between determination and heartbreak. The photo must have been taken right after I left his office. Later I would learn that a junior employee, someone who recognized me as the CEO's mother, had snapped it and posted it online, thinking it was all just a touching moment about hard work and humble beginnings. But that internet machine, it doesn't run on kindness. It runs on outrage. By evening, my phone buzzed like it was alive. Reporters left messages, influencers tagged Derek's company, headlines blared, "Ungrateful millionaire ignores his mother's birthday." Talk shows picked it up, turning my private ache into entertainment. People debated everything from my cardigan to his sense of loyalty. Strangers wrote me from as far as Brazil and Norway, telling me they stood with Mama Lorraine. It was strange comfort, strangers lining up behind your pain. Each article carried that same photograph, my image turned into a moral social currency. Some commented that it was sweet, others that it was manipulative, plenty that it was proof no amount of money fixes bad upbringing. I stopped reading somewhere between the first and the 1,000th remark. It all felt like being caught naked in someone else's dream. Inside my house, I closed the blinds and turned the phone face down. Miss Cleo came by with gumbo, bless her heart, whispering, "You hold your head high, honey." He needed that lesson. But pride wasn't what I felt. I felt shame, heavy and old-fashioned. For a lifetime, I'd kept our struggles, our heartbreaks, tucked neatly inside these four walls. Now every corner of the internet knew the sound of my disappointment. 2 days later, Derek called. His voice was low, dull, the way a man sounds when lightning finally strikes his roof. "Mema," he said, "I didn't mean for this to happen." "I know," I told him, "because I did." Raising anyone teaches you the difference between intent and impact. Sometimes life tells on us, though, whether we mean it to or not. "They're calling me, all kinds of things," he muttered. "Sponsors are asking for statements. PR drafted an apology, but it sounds fake. They want photos of us together smiling. Damage control." The words stung more than they should have. "Baby, you don't owe anybody but yourself the truth. Don't perform it. Feel it." He didn't answer for a moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was smaller than I remembered. "I don't know how to fix this, Mama. You start by not calling it this. It's not a scandal. It's a wound." After we hung up, I stood for a long time in my kitchen, staring at the binder of newspaper clippings I'd assembled over the years. For the first time, those pages felt foreign, like they belonged to someone else's son. The next week passed with television trucks parked along the main street, reporters knocking politely while pretending it wasn't intrusion. When one of them asked if they could film a reaction video, I told them, "Reactions are for chemistry labs. I'm just a mother, not a headline." They left me mostly alone after that. Meanwhile, Derek's company released a short statement full of polished remorse. Still, the tone was different this time. It wasn't just corporate gloss. Somehow, humility seeped through his words. You could hear the tremor of a man trying to remember his own origins. By that Friday, a grey sedan pulled into my driveway. Through the curtains, I saw him step out, no chauffeur, no press crew, just Derek in plain clothes, shoulders bent as if the air itself weighed on them. My hands trembled so much that I nearly dropped the teapot I was holding. When I opened the door, we just looked at each other. Years of pride and misunderstanding lived in that silence, stubborn and raw. I broke it with a small nod. "You better come in before the neighbors start guessing the ending." He gave a huff of laughter that came out half a sigh. Inside, the house smelled of cornbread cooling on the counter. He glanced around as though seeing it for the first time in forever: the patched curtains, the old rocking chair he once fell out of, the cross-stitch on the wall that read "Love grows even in clay." "I should have called," he began. "Yes, you should have." He winced but didn't defend himself. "I didn't think about how it looked for you, I mean. That photo." He shook his head. "Mema, everyone at the office keeps gossiping. They even started calling you the heart of Miller Technologies. Can you believe that? I can believe folks will turn guilt into slogan if it keeps them feeling good." He smiled then, faintly, and for a second I saw the boy he'd been, the one who always tried to make me laugh after doing wrong. We sat at the kitchen table, the very same one that had waited through silent birthdays and forgotten calls. The afternoon light filtered in soft and golden, dust floating between us like memory made visible. He clasped his hands. I looked through the scrapbook. "Oh." The word slipped out small. "I didn't sleep after you left. I went page by page. It's the realest story I've ever read. No press release can touch it." His voice cracked slightly. "I forgot how much of your life fit into mine. That did it." My eyes brimmed. "Son, I didn't mean for the world to see our business. I would have carried that quiet forever if I could. Maybe it needed light," he said slowly. "Maybe I did. We sat without speaking for a while, listening to the tick of the hallway clock. The thing about forgiveness, it doesn't come like a flash flood. It seeps, gentle and steady, until one day you notice the ground's no longer cracked. Finally, he reached across the table, covered my wrinkled hand with his. That simple gesture felt like kneeling. "I'm sorry, Mama. For making you feel small, for treating love like an appointment I could reschedule." His apology didn't erase the hurt, but it started stitching at the edges. I squeezed his hand back. "What matters is what you do next. I thought about donating half my bonus to that scholarship fund you always talked about," he said timidly, like a student waiting for a grade. "That'd be a start," I said, "but don't buy your way back to good. Walk it." He nodded. "Then maybe I'll start here, come home next month for service, help at the food pantry." His eyes flicked to the window where the world watched through metaphor again. "Do you think folks will believe I mean it?" "They don't have to," I said. "You just have to mean it longer than the internet remembers you." We ate quietly after that, the food awkward but familiar. He told me stories about the parts of his life that didn't make headlines: the loneliness of hotel rooms, the echo inside glass offices after everyone's gone. I told him about my sparrows, my aching knees, the neighbor girl applying for nursing school. Between bites of cornbread, laughter crept in, cautious at first, then growing freer. When the sun began to lower, he stood to leave. Outside, reporters were long gone, their novelty spent. He hugged me at the doorway, smelling of soap and remorse. For the first time in years, I didn't have to reach up. He bent down all on his own. As his car pulled away, I touched the spot on the table his hand had warmed. A strange calm spread through me, the kind that comes only when truth finally meets air. The picture online would fade eventually, replaced by new outrage, new stories. But what lingered was our own quieter reckoning, the understanding that sometimes the world needs to witness what a family hides before the family itself can truly see it. I watched the last light slip beyond the pines, and for the first time in weeks, my chest didn't feel like it was splintering. The silence between me and my son had broken not with noise, but with honesty. What began as a scandal turned into a truth we both needed to speak. The months following that long talk settled around me like a calmer season. News faded as quickly as it had flared, moving on to newer dramas that did not include a tearful mother and her red-eyed son. What stayed behind was the thing the internet could never capture, the quiet work of repair. Derek kept his word. At first, I expected another wave of promises followed by distance, but he surprised me. It began with a photograph in the local paper of all places: my son, sleeves rolled up, standing beside a group of bright-eyed students at the community center. The headline read, "Business Leader Launches Lorraine Miller Scholarship Foundation." I didn't cry right away. Some joys creep in sideways, asking permission to stay. Later that night, he called me, voice stripped bare of showmanship. "Did you see it, Mama? We gave out 5 scholarships today. You should have seen those kids." Reminded me of my own hope before I knew what fear of failure felt like. "I'm proud of you," I told him simply. Those words no longer had the weight of expectation. They were blessings, light and genuine. He began visiting once a month. No entourage, no assistant, just Derek, trading cuff links for rolled sleeves, sitting beside me at church like a man hungry for peace. Some Sundays we'd steal away afterward to the diner by the highway, order meatloaf plates, and talk about nothing in particular. He wanted to hear stories about patients I'd nursed decades back, how I used to juggle double shifts, and bedtime stories. He listened not to fix anything, just to listen. That was new. Around our 4th such lunch, he handed me a folded paper. "I want to sponsor the church pantry renovations," he said. "In your name, if that's okay." I looked at him over my spectacles and said, "Son, you do it because it's needed, not because it carries my name." He smiled. "Then I'll do it because you taught me what needed looks like." Sometimes, redemption comes disguised as an ordinary afternoon. In my own small orbit, life softened too. The garden I'd long neglected now thrived again. My fingers relearned the joy of soil, of coaxing green things out of dirt. Tomatoes fat as hearts, collards bright, marigolds stubbornly orange. On Saturdays, local children came by, their laughter spilling over the fence as they helped pull weeds. I tutored them in reading once the sun dipped low, our shared reward a slice of pound cake and stories about growing up when phones had cords and neighbors had time. One girl, Little Destiny, asked me why I smiled even when the weeds kept coming back. I told her the truth, because the weeds remind me the ground's still alive. Only the dead soil stays perfect. She blinked, nodded like she understood more than her years claimed. Peace can sneak up on a body. You don't see it coming until one day you open your eyes and realize your shoulders don't ache from yesterday anymore. In that newfound space, I began clearing out the things that carried old resentments: the fancy jewelry Derek had gifted when he still thought money could patch over distance, diamond earrings too heavy for my ears, a gold bracelet that clanked like an apology. I took them to a donation center in town. The volunteer there, startled, said, "Are you sure? These could sell for a lot." "That's the point," I replied. "Let them make someone else feel blessed. I already am." Walking home afterward, the air felt lighter, like I'd dropped not just the jewelry but the burden of waiting to be repaid for love. There were still moments when old habits tried to knock on my door: the instinct to check my phone on birthdays, to expect too much of what a call should mean. I learned to meet those feelings with gentleness instead of scolding them away. Hurt doesn't vanish, it transforms, like coal, into something that can light or warm depending on how you use it. Derek and I didn't rewrite our story into perfection. Some silences stayed, unfillable in the way natural gaps belong inside music. But when he called now, his voice carried home in it. "Hey, Mama," he'd say, just that simple, and the sound steadied my heart like a metronome. One evening that winter, he arrived unannounced. This time it was his turn to surprise me. The old joke looped back on itself. I opened the door to find him holding a small box, sheepish grin in place. "It's not jewelry," he teased quickly. Inside was a single candle, handmade by some local artisan, vanilla and cedar scent curling in the air. The top label read, "For when you wait, not for who you're waiting on." I laughed until my sides hurt. Sounds like something a poet would sell to housewives. "And to sons trying to do better," he added. We lit that candle that night while I reheated supper. The two of us sat by the window, sharing chicken stew and quiet amusement at how far we'd both come. Everything about the scene was smaller than it used to be: no grand speeches, no indulgences, but somehow it filled more space. Later, as he prepared to leave, I caught him looking around the house, his gaze resting on the garden tools propped by the back door. "You've built a good life here, Mama," he said softly. "This house is nothing grand," I replied, "but peace doesn't need square footage." When he hugged me goodbye, I could feel his heartbeat steady against my shoulder. The boy I'd raised and the man he'd become had finally found the same rhythm. After his car lights disappeared down the road, I sat in the dim room, that candle still flickering. Its flame leaned one way, then the other, steady but alive, just like us. I thought about every version of myself that had existed before this night: the young nurse scraping change together, the mother waiting by the phone, the woman walking out of a skyscraper with shaking hands. They were all still part of me, but none of them carried the same ache anymore. I could love without expecting applause. The next morning the sparrows came early, as if sensing that peace needed an audience. I scattered crumbs and whistled softly. The sun caught dew on their feathers, and something in my chest unknotted for good. Time will wear away almost every bruise, but memory settles into meaning if you let it. Somewhere miles away, Derek was likely in another boardroom, but I knew now he carried more than spreadsheets with him. He carried the echo of that kitchen clock, the smell of marigolds, the weight of a scrapbook's lesson, that love is work, not ceremony. I walked back inside, brewed coffee, and flipped my radio to its gentle gospel hum. In the mirror's dull glass, I saw an older woman with a small smile, not triumphant, just content. You don't measure love by the price tag, it's measured by who shows up when all the candles melt away. Sometimes we raise our children so high, we forget they can't see our hands waving from below. That thought stayed with me the night I turned 63, 1 year after the birthday that never was. The table was smaller this time, no extra plate, No waiting candle, but peace sat across from me like an old friend who'd finally come home. I baked the same chocolate cake I always had, only half the size. The smell wrapped around the house just the way it used to, sweet and steady. I didn't frost it perfectly, never could, but I swirled the top with the back of a spoon, left a few ridges like soft mountains. That imperfection felt right now. It told the truth of how love ages, rougher at the edges, wiser at the center. While it cooled, I poured myself a cup of tea and looked out the window. The porch light caught the outline of my little garden, each plant bowed but stubbornly green. Life keeps working even when you stop insisting on perfection. I thought about all those nights I'd mistaken waiting for loving, sitting by the phone, holding space for words that weren't coming. Turns out, love doesn't vanish with silence, it just changes its language. It starts speaking through what we tend, who we forgive, the comfort we give ourselves when no one else shows up. Derek called that night, right on time. His voice carried laughter, the easy kind that once seemed impossible. "Happy birthday, Mama. You still using that old recipe?" "Still and forever," I said. "You know I won't live long enough to perfect it, but that's half the charm." He chuckled. "I'll drive down next weekend, we'll eat the leftovers together." And before we hung up he added, quiet and sure, "I love you." That simple phrase, said without prompting, filled more space inside me than any grand gesture ever had. I looked at the phone after he hung up and whispered back, "About time you remembered." Afterward, I cut a thin slice of cake, lit a single candle, and let its flame dance against the kitchen window. My reflection blinked back at me, older, lined, content. What a difference a year of honesty can make. Last year's candle had melted down through tears. This one stood proud, flame steady even when the air moved around it. The clock ticked softly in the hallway, same sound as always, yet it no longer mocked me. It was just time doing its job, reminding me that nothing stays frozen, not even heartache. I thought back to every moment that had led me here, the empty table, the marble lobby, the viral photo, the soft apology that grew into change. All those scenes used to hurt like unfinished sentences. Now they read like chapters with page numbers that make sense. What I came to learn through all that broke us, healed us thicker than before. Pride had disguised itself as love in my house, and ambition had disguised itself as duty in my son's. But both of us, underneath our disguises, had just been afraid to be forgotten, afraid to need, afraid to admit we missed each other. When fear runs the household, even nice furniture can't make it a home. Here's what love taught me the hard way: it is not a transaction, and it will not compete for attention. If you have to shout to be heard, you're probably standing in the wrong room. Real love, steady, sustaining love whispers. You just have to quiet the world long enough to hear it. That night, after I blew out the candle, I didn't make a wish. I'd learned better than to bargain with hopes. Instead, I said a thank you to God, to the child who still grows inside my grown son, to the woman I had to become to meet them both again. Later, I stepped out onto the porch. The sparrows that used to crowd my mornings now slept tucked under the eaves. The air was thick with honeysuckle, and the stars looked close enough to reach. I thought about all the mothers out there nursing their own invisible heartbreaks, the unanswered messages, the hollow dinners, the anniversaries no one remembers. And I wanted to tell them this: invisibility doesn't mean absence. Sometimes it means you occupy a deeper space, quiet but vital, like roots holding up the tree. I looked back through the open doorway into my little house that had witnessed both rupture and repair. It wasn't much, but warmth radiated from every corner. Simpleness has its own kind of sacred. Tomorrow I'd spend the morning tutoring Destiny and her friends, then head to the food pantry. The Scholarship Foundation would soon fund its second year, and Derek had promised to bring the recipients to meet me. Life, it seemed, had orchestrated its own full circle without fanfare. As I turned to go inside, a breeze swept through, winking the porch light. I took it as God's nod of approval. I thought of all I'd gained since being forgotten. Perspective, humility, the courage to stop measuring love with calendars and gifts. I'd found myself not in grand reconciliations but in the ordinary rhythm of days, folding laundry, planting seeds, Forgiving silence the way you forgive rain for falling where it must. People ask me now if I've truly forgiven Derek. I tell them forgiveness isn't a moment, it's maintenance. It's what you sweep each morning so bitterness doesn't collect like dust. I still stumble sometimes, still feel the old ache when his voice drops into business mode, but then he'll laugh, or remember a story from our kitchen years, and the ache gentles back into gratitude. Healing, I've learned, doesn't demand erasure. It asks for room. Room for truth, for laughter, for all the uneven memories that prove we're still human. Now this part is for you, whoever finds these words mother, child, friend, stranger with a wound shaped like mine. Don't carry your hurt so tight it forgets how to breathe. Don't mistake distance for abandonment, or silence for verdict. Sometimes love is just hibernating, waiting for honesty to thaw it out. If you've ever sat at an empty table hoping for a phone to ring, know this: the ringing isn't proof of your worth. You were worthy the moment you set that second plate. So tonight, as I rinse my cup and turn down the lamp, I whisper a prayer for anyone feeling unseen. May your peace arrive like morning light through cracked blinds, quiet, consistent, certain. Have you ever felt unheard by the ones you love most? Tell your heart's truth down in the comments, child. Somebody there needs to feel less alone.